What's going on, boys? Today we are talking a bit about discipline. Not in the waking up at 4 a.m. and then standing in one spot to demonstrate something and accomplish nothing sense, but rather in the skill associated with either a long standing organization or aspect of human nature sense. And then we're going to talk a bit about my discipline, or one thing in my discipline, because the last couple weeks have been hard and I'd like to relax a little bit. And then we can get back into fuck the world mode soon. Alienation and aimlessness are two key aspects of our current world, the modern world. Two of many disastrous consequences. And while you need to find your sense of purpose inside yourself, you can locate yourself, find a niche, even if just mentally, to defend yourself within via discipline. Investing in a discipline, participating in it at large, gives you a sense of place. A discipline is a skill that's been around long before you were born and will be around long after you die. It's also membership in an organization or an order that performs this essential function. For instance, I'm an academic, particularly a literary academic. I'm not as high up the ladder as I'd like to be, because there is no way I can handle that level of debt, but I am initiated. And that skill and membership scaffold my identity a bit when I'm shaky. Which is important, by the way, because I don't think we would have ego and identity if we weren't meant to flesh them out. I tried some ego dissolution shit recently, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It didn't accomplish what I was hoping it was going to accomplish, and I didn't like it. Which is more than a little bit upsetting, but I think the reason behind it is some people should have their egos dissolved. Other people should flesh out their egos as much as possible, dig as deep as possible, and a discipline is a good means of working on that. Through struggle, you've developed a potent tool, and you have a set of values or principles to flavor your life and then interpret as you develop your own identity and ego further. Your discipline helps you feel secure in yourself when the world is trying to deprive you of that security and that sense of self, which is all the time, always. That comes from the power the discipline grants you, but also from its enduring, evolving nature. Again, typically tied with an aspect of human nature. Western civilizationalists who have read only contemporary self-help books and never read any of the fiction or poetry of the canon they claim to be fighting on behalf of, say the humanities are poisoned, communist, and train people what to think, not how to think. Well, literary academia has existed for thousands of years before communism was invented. It'll exist thousands of years after communism, or Marxism, whatever they want to call it, has been all but forgotten. And while it's true there are current biases, the fact this discipline has existed for so long means you can't just change it. It's made of steel. They might encourage you to use your tools a certain way but they can't not give them to you. To do that, they would need to limit your access or erase all the materials of all the academics that have been using these tools for thousands of years. And they can't do that because if they do, then they have nothing. You no longer have a discipline and they can't make money off you. They might be able to try to pull an MGS2 and create and control context instead of content, and that might work on other disciplines, but our discipline is the creation and control of context. And that's implying the big bad you think is a big bad, Marxism, is something people should not be allowed to study. That sounds sort of like censorship to me. Marxist theory is interesting to study on its own and in context, its original context. When you study literature, which people seem to think is just English, just fiction, it's not. It's more the evolution, natural or forced, of a culture's fabric. What people think and how they think. It's not named well, and neither are your tools. Critical methods or critical methodology. What does that even mean? When I was slowly undergoing initiation, I thought all this vagueness and confusion was the result of stupidity, not realizing the wider context of what this discipline is and what initiation means. Again, these disciplines have been around for a long time, and in antiquity, your membership in one of these disciplines or one of these guilds equaled distinction, status, and knowledge or capability with the intent of acquiring power. I think that's one of the reasons so many people are attracted to the military. That is also a discipline. And what is, ideally, the military for so many people? It's a job, but it's also a set of skills. It is distinction. It's location, both in your society and in history. I imagine many soldiers, or at least some soldiers, think of themselves rightly in relation to Roman soldiers. A feeling of security inside in a kinship across millennia. You have located yourself in your time and in all time. And then, as you age, you can develop that location yourself over time, as you develop. That's how I feel about academia, and that's what other disciplines seem to be for other people. I have an ESTJ friend, also with a master's, but in medicine. I haven't spoken with him in 7 months, but we're still cool, I think. Medicine, for him, is something to use, something to think about and try to advance in his way, and something to, again, locate himself. I am a surgeon. I'm an academic. That membership, despite my not teaching, despite my not participating in academia in a while now, helps me understand part of who I am and helps me move forward in a way suited to me. And what's interesting is a discipline is different from a skill. A skill is something you can develop and use on your own. But I've found in the skill world, even if you are using a self-developed skill in a field, there is a competitive nature to it. There's an isolation. I'm a writer, but I don't feel connected with other writers. There is a tradition of writing, but I don't feel connected with that tradition. But academia is different. I feel competition with other academics, but I don't feel isolated from them. And I think that's because it is an organizational tradition. There's a set of values, there's a heritage, there's a hierarchy, there's a very clear location. And not only is there access to the history of your tradition, but you're also expected to work with that history directly as an academic. One academic in this era to another academic in your era. So in 1,000 years, another academic in another era can work with your work. Again, engineering, medicine, teaching, fighting. The disciplines reflective of our nature, our species has developed, and if we ever are to wipe ourselves out almost completely but not entirely, will develop again. Your discipline helps guide you if you want it, helps flesh you out as a person, and puts you in communication with your species. You're participating in time, in your evolution, in societies, not just society. You aren't just floating along for a little while and then getting snuffed out. You are in this shit. All this to say, if you're feeling aimless or like you don't exist, trying to get yourself initiated into a discipline probably wouldn't hurt. Just ensure it's the right one and for the right reasons. Okay, now for something not completely different, Edmund Spenser and the Faerie Queene. One of the most complicated things I don't understand but thoroughly enjoy. I'm just going to talk about it for a little while, because it feels like the flesh around my collar is trying to twist in on itself. I've been eating Cheez-Its alone, both alone in the sense of nobody around and in the sense of eating nothing else. Cheez-Its for days, literally, Cheez-Its for meals, for about a week and a half, and my body is starting to moyai at me and throat sing. Spenser's The Faerie Queene is the foundational Western text. Without Spenser, you don't have Shakespeare. But why do you hear about Shakespeare all the time and not Spenser? Well, it's because Shakespeare, despite being mythologized into this height of intelligence figure, and don't get me wrong, Shakespeare was a genius, was not writing extraordinarily complicated texts. He wrote keen observations of human nature stated plainly, for the time. And I think that's why there's a tendency toward believing if there is a series of texts or media from Western culture to be sent forward preserved, Shakespeare would be high on that list, but not Spenser. Because again, Shakespeare somehow became this writer for intellectuals of our time, when in reality, he was just writing good shit for dummies in his time. It's like saying Star Wars is one of the greatest cinematic achievements of all time. You're right, but you need to make clear why you're right, because people a few hundred years from now might get the wrong idea. You don't have to think super hard about Shakespeare to understand what he's communicating to you. You can, and you should, but what makes him great is you don't have to. More recently, in modernism, it's like Hemingway versus Joyce. Hard thinking, critical methods aren't required to enjoy Hemingway. Though they are recommended, Hemingway is my favorite. Versus Joyce, who is going to fight you tooth and nail over just your ability to understand what's happening at all. Another thing to think about, to carry with you, you'll hear sometimes people say poems are not encrypted messages. They aren't. They are foundations for you to think from. And some people sometimes can understand that and appreciate it. But with longer texts, there is a tendency toward perceived mastery. People saying, this is what a text is about. This alone is what it's saying. They're looking at this like a long encrypted message, which is somewhat certain academics' faults, because people want a clear TLDR and to be done with it. That's what makes you money, that's what gets you renown. When in reality, a text can mean, with qualifications, anything. Now, that isn't to say you can just come into a text and say or do anything or try to make it mean anything in any way. What you can do is apply your methods and research to it and come up with something maybe completely different or unexpected. Ulysses stays relevant because it is a fertile text, meaning the book is complicated and loaded, but also grounded enough you can make it mean or find in it a great many things using your methods. Versus something like Finnegan's Wake, which many people argue is, well, it is a more complicated text, but it is less relevant, it's less fertile, because it's so complicated, you're going to have a harder time making useful thoughts out of it. And that's what you're doing. You need to think of texts not as encrypted messages, but as generators for different ways of thinking. It's like trying to build new constellations, except in 50 to 100 years, these constellations might be used by people to do something. Some people, their theories, cut their teeth on Ulysses and use it as a tool to oppose colonialism. Other people use Ulysses, cut their theories' teeth on Ulysses to support colonialism. Psychology threw Freud away a long time ago. I hate Freud. But English departments decided Freudian psychology is an interesting way to read things, despite the psychological establishment throwing them away, so we're going to take them and use them. An article is going to make an argument and do its best to prove its thesis statement. Upon your reading or completion of this article, you will now understand this could mean this, or does mean this. They're going to argue it does mean this, not just this is one possibility of many. And in knowing this, we can now start working on this other thing. And in addition, they're going to load the article up with auxiliary interesting shit, not only to inform you of other cool shit that's out there for you to read about and think about and maybe use later, but also to try to get other stars in alignment in this constellation. The goal being, again, to create a new way of thinking about things that is conducive to clear action. You're using words to change people's minds, to create material changes, to create action. It's difficult to explain, but I love it because it's powerful. once you see it, you can't unsee the power theory has on the world. By controlling the way people think about things, you control the range of things that can happen. But we were trying to talk about Spencer, but I haven't had the opportunity to go on enjoyable tangents in a while. Allegory was important in Old England. Look up Old English allegorical plays. Aristocrats would play roles meant to be direct allegories. So this character is the personification of this. And then they would act out these concepts interacting with each other. And in this way, they would perform the function of the English state. And these plays would get weird. I didn't even realize they had certain technologies back then, but it was kind of crazy. Moving stages and shit. And the Faerie Queene presents itself as an extended allegorical narrative poem performing the same role these allegorical plays would. Using these narratives built around characters who are not characters, they aren't people, they are biological allegories of concepts essential to the English state and also to the English identity. And they are, but also they aren't. This will get clearer later, and I want to give you the disclaimer. I haven't read the Faerie Queene in like 5 years, so this is all going entirely off memory because I really like shooting from the hip, and it's a lot more fun remembering it than it was dying in the middle of it. So, what I can remember from book 1. Key points. This is all just for fun. I'm not putting on a course, not doing a lecture. I am not prepared for that. Holy shit, I just want to enjoy something for a little while. Book 1 of the Faerie Queene. The Faerie Queene, a representation of Big E the First, is holding court. Some idiot dirt farmer shows up and sits on the ground, which is horrible manners and it's embarrassing, it's humiliating, and he asks to be sent on a quest. That's his wish. So he becomes Red Cross Knight. You know the image you think of when you think of a Crusader Templar? That's Red Cross. That's Spencer. The Faerie Queene is about the foundation of the Round Table. And it's interesting because this initial incarnation of the Round Table is nothing like what we think of when we think of the Round Table. Anyway, Red Cross Knight. He is the allegory of holiness. I remember he at some point time travels forward and sees where the Round Table is going to be and then comes back, but it culminates in a battle with, oh my god, I think I remember her name. It's Error, spelt incorrectly. Well, actually, no, this was written before the alphabet was finalized, which makes reading it a lot of fun. So it's not actually Error spelt incorrectly, but her name is Error. She is a monster, a woman monster, who hoards and eats books and vomits acid ink. And Red Cross crawls down into her cave and just... No, he does not kick the shit out of her. Oh my god, I don't remember if he fought a dragon. He gets fucked up at some point. Red Cross gets severely fucked up. But then he kills Error. No, maybe Error was the halfway point and then he fights a dragon. I distinctly remember Red Cross fighting a dragon, getting his shit pushed in, and then somehow overcoming it. That might have been Error, I don't remember. Error is the important one here. Because if you're reading it on a basic level, all you're getting out of it is a down home country boy goes out and kills a monster. Some cool imagery, but that's a rather simple story. So then you read a little deeper into it. Alright, this knight of holiness goes and kills a woman monster who likes books. Wonder what that means. Well, traditionally, that's read as not only are women evil monsters who should be killed, also, women women shouldn't be allowed to read, but also, books that are accessible to the public are evil. Reading or literacy should be kept out of the hands of the common folk, except for the Bible, but that should also be out of there. Reading will send you to hell. Women need to be killed. And while that is a very based reading of Red Cross the Crusader, that's not it either exactly. I mean, you certainly could read it that way. That was the sentiment of the period, but you got to remember, if books are evil, and reading is evil, and fiction is evil, why is a guy writing a fictional book somewhat accessible to the public about books being evil? And if women shouldn't be allowed to be literate or in a position of power, then why is the representation or the allegory of Big E's divine right to rule, and not rule under a man, but rule as an antiquarian girl boss there? These are conflicting messages, intentionally. You see, if I'm remembering correctly, this was, I don't remember if this was before or just before or during, but Spencer's livelihood rested on the court's patronage of him. He would get a stipend to write these poems, these long narrative poems, gratifying the queen and, as mentioned earlier, hardening out or building, bolstering is the word, the foundations of the English identity, English culture, which is what we're still doing today. We are still analyzing and controlling culture, which is why these messages are so weird. There's a lot of interference. On one hand, Spencer wants to keep his job. That's difficult because there's a woman in charge and a lot of people who hate women. And between those two extreme, cognitively dissonant standpoints, Spencer wants to get his own bullshit in there. There's also the fact Red Cross, the first knight we're introduced to, is a shit shoveler. A shit shoveler in service of the queen becomes the manifestation of holiness. And at this point, we haven't broken the illusion this is not, or this is allegory yet. Spencer is important because the Faerie Queene is one of the first proper Western hyper-fertile texts we have. You might not know who Spencer is, but everything we are was articulated by Spencer. Again, Shakespeare was obsessed with Spencer. Everybody was. He was England's poet. What sort of power do you think a person would wield, or what effect do you think they would have on the future if your nation's leaders pointed at this one guy and said, he'll tell you what we are and what we believe in, and what you are and what you should believe in? Spencer constructed this fire-ass beginning in such a way people will see what they want to see in it. There are many different readings, and you can make new ones. It's a robust text. And this is the first one and the simplest one. None of this is black or white. It's not even grayscale. There are many, many different, very specific, contradictory details in there, and it's your job to figure out what this means. I mean, one of my friends at the time wrote an essay on it about how error was actually an argument against the church or against Catholicism. And if, I swear to Christ, I hope I'm remembering that correctly. But the detail I do remember clearly is my friend learned one of the popes was a bona fide necromancer. Necromancer, not necrophiliac. Although that wouldn't surprise me. And that was a concern. And he wrote an essay about it and how Red Cross, as the allegory of holiness, represents not a distrust of literature, but a distrust of the monstrousness that comes from dogmatic literature like Catholicism, something like that. Anyway, Book 2, well, no, not my personal favorite. I like them all a whole lot. This one was my favorite for a while. Guion, the Knight of Temperance. What I took from this is the degrees values can exist in. If I'm remembering correctly, Guion's end goal, because they all have these quests, is to reach this pleasure palace and take something out of there without being tempted. He's the Knight of Temperance. Now, early in his quest, this demon, whom I remember looking like Nurgle, but not being a poison demon, captures Guion and drags him down into something like hell adjacent, and shows him piles and piles, just mountains of gold, literal mountains of gold. They're walking this path on these mountains of gold, and this demon is trying to tempt Guion into abandoning his quest and taking the gold. But Guion, being the Knight of Temperance, couldn't give any less of a shit. In fact, he's so to the point of not giving a shit about this gold that he doesn't even try to escape. He just walks along, he hikes along this trail with this demon, tempting him into this gold, and politely listens to him because that's the temperate thing to do. Zero interest in the gold, and the demon is getting increasingly pissed until realizing that this dude literally does not give a fuck. You can quote him on that. The demon frees him. Says, Jesus, dude, I can't tempt you with anything. Shit. You are the Knight of Temperance, and you're temperancing everywhere right now. So, after being freed, some stuff happens. I think Guion kills some... I think Guion kills some dude's... I think Guion fucking murders a dude's brother. Because that's the temperate thing to do. And some other stuff happens. It's so much shit happens in these books. But eventually Guion reaches the pleasure palace. And he walks inside. And it's just, as Obi-Wan would say, constant porno, Luke. You have no idea. And everyone is tempting him. And what's interesting here is, while Guion still does not partake, from the beginning of his entrance to the time he leaves, never partakes. But he does start getting really angry. Like, these two elven fairy women are bathing in this fountain, and they invite him to join them, and they're just having the best time. And he starts getting blue ball rage, and just just flips that shit and tells them they're disgusting, like a proper Sigma male. And it's written in a very proper way, but the Knight of Temperance is raging hard and just... he's edging. he's edging on his quest. And the further in he gets, the more of a dick he becomes. Ironically, they keep offering him stuff that's not just sexual. They keep offering him, like, okay, you don't want to fuck, that's fine. You want some wine? He throws that shit in their face. I don't want your wine. Get that shit out of here. And to be clear, his quest was not to fuck up all their stuff. His quest was just to go in, get this thing, and get out. He is ruining their vibes of his own accord. So the unstated point here being, while Guion is technically being temperate in the pleasure palace, that's not real temperance. Real temperance is being so temperate, you so don't want something. You are so not tempted by something. You're just blunted. Your affect is blunted. You do not care. What Guion is exhibiting is restraint. In actuality, this Knight of Temperance is corrupted because he really wants this stuff. He's stopping himself, but the fact that he was corrupted internally enough that exercising restraint made him angry indicates Guion is not fit to be the Knight of Temperance. And this is actually where we break from the whole these characters are strictly allegories thing. Or rather, where these allegories start becoming characters rather than just allegories. Now, again, there's no black or white, there's not even a grayscale. It's not like they transition from allegories to characters. It's more like they are still allegories, but they are now also characters, and you don't know when which is in effect, or to what degree which is in effect. The point I took out of book 2 here, the one I think about still all the time, is just because you are forcing yourself to do something traditionally pure doesn't mean you are pure. You can hide your nature, but that doesn't change the fact you are rotten inside if you are rotten inside. Like Guion, monetarily, yeah, he is temperate, but he also, his balls are bursting. He's on the verge of acting unwise. And what's interesting is his dedication, or his dedication to trying to be temperate actually turns him into an asshole. In his quest to stay pure, he ruins everybody's day. He's just mean to everybody. You could read that as ignoring your nature in the hopes of following society's standards of what you're told you should be makes you a nasty person. Or you can read it as he did completely the right thing. When you feel tempted, or if you're in this situation, you're a temperance knight, and you feel tempted, you should get angry and break shit. And Guion, his excursion into the pleasure palace, has been used a number of different ways. It's a fertile text. You can make of it what you want to, and use it as a guiding force as long as you are arguing well. And it works, makes sense. Again, hard to explain. Some things work and other things don't. Now, this is where things get hazy. I want to talk about Scudamore, Bizarrain, Britomart, Amoret, and Saturain. Now, I remember book 4 is Britomart. I think book 3 is Scudamore, but I don't remember exactly. I know Scudamore comes in part before Britomart. Or Scudamore, yeah, did I? Did I rhyme accidentally? I've lost my place. Scudamore comes a bit before Britomart. Amoret's in there, and Bizarrain, I think they're in book 4. Or I think they're mentioned in book 3, but then come into their own in book 4. And then... Shit. I know Saturain. I think Saturain is in book 4. If not book 4, then early book 5. But anyway, my point here being there's a timeline that's fuzzy, and we're going to try to get through it. But if I bounce around, please bear with me. Scudamore is a gamer. In one of my stories, I kept writing and rewriting. There was a character named Scudamore, shortened to Scud. Because Scudamore is such a loser bastard. And I love that he's on the round table, but Jesus, am I remembering correctly? I don't even think there was a round table, at least initially, in the Faerie Queene. I know this is about the Knights of the Round Table, but I swear to God there was not a round table initially. Anyway, Scudamore is a gamer and a knight. Amoret is his beloved, and she has been captured by Bizarrain, a mage. Scudamore's big quest is to save Amoret from Bizarrain. Bizarrain has captured Amoret and is keeping her suspended in his tower. And he's carving every day, carving shitty love poetry onto her skin with a knife in blood, and then getting really aggravated with himself for writing it poorly, and then regenerating her skin, and then cutting new love poetry into her again. And this is often read as a dude fucking up social forms and failing in the love department as a result. Because it's not just... Love back then was different. Now, you'll sometimes hear people say, romantic love is a recent development, it didn't exist back then. That's incorrect. Rather, it did exist, but it wasn't as important in the way we think about it. But love, the way we conceive of it, has always existed. It's just a different degree of value placed on different things. So in this instance, and this was important for a long time. It still is kind of, not as institutional as it used to be, but specific rituals. You have to do certain things in a certain way because that's just how they need to be done. We spent some time reading increasingly unhinged love poetry written by an American colonial incel. This new money aristocrat really wanted to date this woman from another family. So he writes her a love poem, but he fucks it up. He doesn't do it the way it's supposed to be done, so she ignores him. And he's too stupid to realize that there is a social form, there is a way that these poems need to be written, certain aspects of character that need to be demonstrated for this romance to be approved. Now, she didn't want it to happen anyway, but the fact this dude was an idiot who wrote poorly and couldn't understand what was happening didn't help, or maybe did help. And he kept writing increasingly passive-aggressive and then aggressive, unhinged love poetry until I guess it got bad enough he got fucking murked. I don't remember what happened to him, but it wasn't a happy ending. It was just really funny watching this dude with no game, this idiot with no game. Whoever told you could work with men? just screw it up. Just repeatedly screw it up and trying to get better and just not getting it. It's very, very funny. People are funny. Anyway, Bizarrain is an early example of that. An unhinged psychopath trying to woo this woman by stabbing her to death repeatedly, or stabbing his love into her repeatedly, and screwing it up. It's horrific shit. But Bizarrain was a very powerful mage, And Scudamore is terrified of him. So Scudamore monologues about how he loves Amaret and he's going to go save her. And then he proceeds to do nothing but side quests for months. He's just fucking around. It's such a. I remember Scudamore's sections being so dumb and aimless. And wondering, why is this dude so dumb and aimless? He needs to go save Amaret. He loves Amaret. He said he loves her. So what's he doing? It's because he's afraid. And he finally gets there. Finally, kicking and screaming internally, gets to Bizarrane's tower. And he's standing outside it, and he puts his fists on his hips. And he stands there. And then he decides he's going to go play Fortnite with the boys. And I'm not joking about that. If I'm remembering correctly, there's a time skip. Scudamore gets there and he's about to go on his quest and finally end it all. And then you find him later participating in a battle royale. Scudamore, where's Amaret? What happened to Amaret? Who? Saturdays are for the boys, and I don't know this woman you're referring to. I don't remember what Scudamore is supposed to represent, but I remember realizing very clearly he is not representing it well. Probably, definitely intentionally. I remember Spencer gets thrown out of his position at some point. He loses his stipend. He pisses some people off. I think it has something to do with the fact that these allegories that are supposed to represent English values are all actually kind of pieces of shit. And again, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't remember if it's Irish or Scottish or Welsh, but Spencer has some other blood in him. And this was a time period in which white wasn't a universal thing. Like, there were some people who were more white than others. But we'll get back to that. Anyway, Britomart. Britomart is the Knight of Chastity. She's the only female knight as far as I can remember. And she's not just supposed to represent chastity. She is also supposed to represent Big E's warrior aspect. And also the chastity aspect. Kind of a passive-aggressive way to pressure her not to get married. Again, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyway, Britomart ends up at Bizarrane's castle and realizes Scudamore is a gamer and has tossed this woman aside. So Britomart decides she's going to go up there and save Amaret from Bizarrane. And I remember Bizarrane's castle being really fucky-wucky. Something about aristocracy, but I mean, what isn't? His castle was really weird. Anyway, she saves Amaret from Bizarrane, and they ride out. Now, Britomart and Amaret become really very good friends. Very, very, very good friends. And another historical thing that's interesting is many masters or patrons and artists back then were very, very, very good friends. And that's specifically because of romantic love, right? Marriage was a political social mechanism. And there wasn't always romantic love there. So wealthy people and artists would often develop these totally not gay, purely heterosexual love for one another. Like, Spencer's wife comes in. Spencer, what are you doing? Oh, nothing. I'm just writing a poem about what me and bro would do to each other if one of us could turn into a woman. Except, hold on, what if... That's kind of not fair. So what about if halfway through we reverse gender bend? God, I'm genius. That way there's no emasculation or homosexuality going on. It's completely equal. It's completely heterosexual. He's a woman, and then I'm the woman. completely fine. Except, what if one of us accidentally turns back at the end, and then maybe. And this was to the point, if you read a medieval love poem written by an artist commissioned by a patron, it is probably about that patron and that artist. I mean, there were definitely standard love poems, but this not gay love thing was a really big deal back then. And you primarily saw it between men. So, a common reading, and in kind of a direct way actually, is Britomart and Amoret's really, really, really good friendship. Like, they're riding on a horse together and going back and forth, and it's just a big mess. And then Amoret gets captured by a creature representing male lust. It's described in a certain way, but when you visualize what's being described, is it's this big ogre creature, but lanky, but also very strong, with balls for ears and a dick trunk. And it is pure comedy, because the creature, upon realizing that he just fucked with Britomart, who is one of the strongest warriors in this canon, and she's gonna come kill him, he ties Amoret to his arm and uses her like a shield. So every time Britomart tries to stab him, he moves Amoret in the way and stabs Amoret in the stomach. So, but again, reading into it, Britomart saves this woman from the manifestation of male lust, who then swoons in her arms. But not swooning, it's not gay, they're very good friends. And Britomart is the Knight of Chastity, right? And she's the only knight, one of the only knights, who's represented as not a backsliding piece of shit. Meaning, is Spencer trying to socially, or justify socially, this weird thing between artists and patrons by putting a representation of the queen in a not gay situation? In other words, saying Britomart is still a perfect representation of chastity because Amoret is just a woman, and I reiterate, just very good friends. Ergo, what Bro and Spencer do, it's also chaste. Because nothing is happening there, because it's two guys. So that you aren't technically breaking anything. Or is Spencer saying Elizabeth, should stay unmarried? It's kind of a very forceful passive aggression, putting Elizabeth in the Knight of Chastity position to say, you represent chastity, therefore you cannot break it. Occupy yourself with a woman if you're having trouble, bruh. Sorry. Or is it both of those things? Or are we meant to read into it to this point and say, no, Britomart is breaking her vow of chastity, just as all the other knights are breaking their shit? And you gotta remember, this was read. This was a very important text. I mean, it is an important text in Western civilization, but it was a lot more important and read back then. Meaning, the way a person read this, or could be convinced to read it, might affect the monarch's decision making. None of this stuff is an accident. Which, I forgot to mention, you might think there are levels of neurodivergence, right? So, Shakespeare is the neurodivergent dude who gets a degree and then starts working around trains, because while he is relatively normal and is seeking gainful employment and finds it, he finds gainful employment here because he really does like trains a lot. Kind of on the down low. Then you have the dude who spends all of his money, no job, on a train set in his basement that nobody's ever going to see, It's not a wise investment. It's not going to make him any money. And then he realizes that he'd kind of like to justify the different eras, because of course he has different eras in this gigantic train set his trains travel through. So he invents time travel, actual time travel, to make his little train set work better. That's Spencer. He wrote thousands of pages of relentlessly rigid poetic form. I don't know. I don't remember what it's called, but there's a very specific, like, this number of syllables and rhyme. Not rhymes. I don't remember if they're rhymes or not, but this specific number of syllables, each line, 5 of them. One, two, three, four, five. This number of syllables in each line and each five in each canto, relentlessly, thousands of pages, never fucking up. That has never been done, or that had never been done before, and it hasn't been done since. Never. Never. Spencer is autistic, brilliantly autistic, savant autistic, in the extreme. There isn't another word for it. His is the autism we should aspire to. The point here being, he had to work to make these things fit the way he wanted them to fit. Meaning, it's not just trying to make a sentence work right. This is like walking through a minefield, because one fuck up is going to cause you problems. You're supposed to be the best. Just to get this message across in this way. None of this is a mistake. Nothing he wrote was an accident. This was his entire life's work, and he didn't even finish it. I think he got about halfway through. There was going to be a lot more, and he just died. Some shit went down. I think a war broke out, and because of his mongoloid, i.e., a little bit less white blood, some shit went wrong. He lost his money. He lost his position. He went back home, and then he died. And then we get to Saturane. Neurodivergence at its peak. One of the most important texts, arguably the most important text, in Western civilization, our Anglo canon, and the author writes his own furry self-insert into the story, into the grand Fortnite match, the Battle Royale, and he has his own mysterious opening. So everybody shows up, all the knights, they're all fighting in this Battle Royale, and this mysterious dude shows up, Mystery Knight, and he's wearing plate armor, but it's also an organic living ghillie suit, right? So it's a mixture of plate armor and plants on his plate armor that allow him to blend into his environment. He's kind of like a swamp monster sort of thing going on. And he's this mysterious dude who comes in out of nowhere. Who is that? Beating the shit out of everybody. And it ends, he wins, of course, because of course he does, the fucking furry. Disgusting. He takes his helmet off, and he's a half beast, half man called Saturane. And he represents wildness, or a man's wild nature, or the civilization of man. There are a few different ways to read him, but he is Spencer in his idealized form. Because remember, Spencer's white, but he's only 99.9% white. He isn't top shelf 100% English white. His teeth are still in kind of good shape, and that makes him a partially subhuman monster. And you gotta remember, this is, I think, 15 to 20 years into Spencer's writing these books. So at this point, it feels like he just doesn't give a shit. Because now, Saturane comes in, and he's supposed to bring this wild outsider perspective, but really he just kind of gives direct advice, and he helps out his own characters on their journeys. And I like Saturane because it's really fucking funny. that again, I have a really big issue with the chud type people, alpha males, because I used to be one of them, or wanted to be one of them. Voluntarily got into that stupid Stefan Molyneux bullshit, and none of them realize the your favorite idol's favorite idol was a furry self-inserter. The reason this is interesting to me, or this concept is interesting to me, is at this point, right, Spencer was hired to create or to solidify an English canon, and he did. But by this point, he's been writing it for so long, and because of what he was supposed to do with his writing, it's almost like these characters are no longer his. So by creating Saturane, Spencer is it is like a self-insert because these are all his OCs, but they aren't really his OCs anymore because this was a commission, literally, and they're getting kind of away from him, and it's making him really insecure. So as a writer does, as an insecure writer does, gotta grab those reins and yank them as hard as possible. And you gotta have people like him. So you self insert, you make him the coolest, wildest badass there ever was, who always has sagely advice and helps out the main characters. And there's no real greater point to bringing Saturane up other than there is nothing new under the sun. Anglo English civilization has been cringe from the beginning. So if you're ever feeling embarrassed about some dumb shit you did, maybe with art when you were younger, comfort yourself with the knowledge the reason we communicate the way we do, one of the main reasons we communicate the way we do, was also a disgusting Wattpad furry. And he did it for the memes, and he did it for government. Canonized dog shit furry self-inserts. Alright, I'm very tired. I don't remember anything else. Or I do, but not enough to do anything with. I am praying one day I'll have enough time and brain and clarity to get through the Faerie Queene one more time at least before I'm in the ground, and hopefully can make a little bit more of it. And it's so that whole course was a trip because we were encouraged to cheat. That the Faerie Queene is so dense, so difficult. Our teacher, or our professor, teacher, Jesus Christ, what am I doing? Our professor explained to us if you aren't really cheating in this course, you're going to have a hard time. And other summary, because this tangent went on a lot longer than I thought it was going to. Discipline. Get a discipline. And then you can feel the level of joy I feel. Whenever I'm having a bad day, or I do something really embarrassing, I think of Spencer, the man who invented English literature and did a bunch of shit about very good friends, based takes about how women shouldn't read and should be killed, and furries, and lots of furries, and gaming, and Fortnite. But that about rippity wraps this one up. I hope you enjoyed watching, because I certainly enjoyed making it. I did enjoy making this one. It's fun to talk about things I enjoy, even if they are quarter remembered things from years ago. Like if you enjoyed, because it helps me out a lot. Subscribe if you haven't, because we do this shit sometimes, and comment your thoughts, because I love hearing from you. What's your discipline if you have one? But thanks again for watching, everybody. Really a lot of fun on this channel. So much fun. In fact, you can spend 20 years writing it. No, God, Jesus, it was more than 20 years. Shit, I think he was writing it for like 35 years, something like that. It was a long-ass time. And then he just died. He got fired, lost all his money, and died. And that's a lot of fun. That's what I'm showing up on this channel, and I look forward to doing this with you guys again in the future.